welcome to the Kemetic How-To Guide for Egyptian Pagan and Kemetic practitioners. I'm your host, Sharon. I have a book to review now that I picked up at Barnes & Noble, and it is The Good Kings, Absolute Power in Ancient Egypt and the Modern World by Kemetic, author of When Women Ruled the World. You know, there's clickbait, and then there's the new bookshelf at Barnes & Noble. I saw this, and I picked up the book and read the back matter. In a new era, when democracies around the world are threatened or crumbling, best-selling author Kemetic turns to ancient Egypt, the first centralized political power on earth, to understand why societies have so willingly supported authoritarian regimes. It goes on a little further from there. I was shopping with my husband and a friend, and I just said, okay, I'll bite. Famous last words, right? Well, it starts off, chapter 1, the introduction. We are all Pharaoh's groupies. Starts off with an excerpt from the first book of Samuel, where the people of Israel are asking the prophet Samuel to anoint a king for them. And he says, this is what the king who will reign over you will do. He will take your sons and make them serve his chariots and horses, and he will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers and da-da-da. You know, but the people refused to listen and said, no, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations. You know, so she's quoting from this as a way of saying, kings are bad, okay? So I said, okay, well, I can see where she's getting at here, but the very next sentence on the very next page, I am a recovering Egyptologist. What do you mean a recovering Egyptologist? You're a professor at UCLA. You have 2 books that are coming out. Recovering from what? Well, she goes on to explain recovering as meaning that she has come to realize her previous love affair with the monuments of the pharaohs and the pyramids and the gold and all those sorts of things is rather like being in an abusive or controlling relationship or being in a cult. Huh? And she goes on to say that we're all in love with these absolutist patriarchs and with the bling and the power, and you know, that basically Egyptology is a group of apologists for this absolutist patriarchy. And even the concept of Ma'at, which Egyptologists present in very positivist terms, can actually be an excuse for maintaining a controlling status quo. Okay, look. We're just in the introduction. And I have a lot of stuff to rebut here. So let's go. First off, she makes blanket assumptions about why we are drawn to ancient Egypt. Yeah, there are plenty of people that are drawn to it for all of the reasons that she talked about, and the alien ideas, and the Atlantean ideas, and all that other stuff, the pyramid power. But you know what? Not all of us are. Yes, I love King Tut, but not for his tomb. Yes, what introduced me to him was the exhibition book for Treasures of Tutankhamun, but as I was reading the book, I became interested in King Tut as the person. Because if you think about it, he ascended the throne when he was 9 years old, when his father and possibly his older brother had died. That's a lot to put on a 9-year-old kid. And there were a lot of people who hated his father. Did he hear these resentful whispers from courtiers? You know, was he aware of this? Was he okay with it? Did he understand? Or was he resentful of the people that were, you know, quietly talking smack about his father? You know, there's a whole lot there that, you know, is intriguing about who was this person. And sure, there's a lot of it that we'll never know, but the questions are compelling. And those are the kinds of things that make me want to learn more. And of course, the Egyptians saw divinity in animals, unlike the Greeks, unlike the Romans, unlike Christians. The Egyptians could see deity in an animal form. And as an animal lover myself, I really appreciated that. And then later, as a young adult, as I was exposed to Eastern forms of worship, I began to see parallels in the ways that is carried on and what, we can surmise from, the physical record that's left from the ancient Egyptians. So, these were things that have nothing to do with, the pyramids and the bling and all that. And it's not colonialist or elitist. I'm more interested in the people. And yes, the idea of Ma'at as balance, order, truth, things as they ought to be, that could be twisted to support, some terrible status quo. But does that mean the idea in itself is bad? No. Same thing with a lot of other great ideas that could easily be twisted to serve someone's needs. That's why, we have to be ever vigilant to prevent that from happening. Of course, if you're a scholar, you're just reading and trying to understand Ma'at as it was, written about in ancient times. But we as Kemetics and Egyptian pagans kind of have a little skin in the game. So for us, the idea of Ma'at, it's a living concept. And so we do have a vested interest in protecting the ideal of Ma'at and not letting it be co-opted for negative purposes. And as for those terrible, awful, no good, patriarchal pharaohs, she singles out specifically Khufu, Senwosret III, Akhenaten, Ramesses II, and Taharka of Nubia. And her reasons, frankly, are entirely predictable. Oh, Khufu built the biggest pyramid, and Herodotus wrote some nasty things about him, and Senwosret was a military strongman, and so was Ramesses the Great, and look at all of those egotistical monuments that he left, and Akhenaten was a cult leader, and Taharka was an oppressed Nubian who embraced his oppressor's ideology. My criticisms here are threefold. For one, she doesn't really offer any new information that a serious student of ancient Egypt wouldn't already know. All of her interpretations are based on the same slivers of data that any other current scholarship would be drawing from. And they're not as extensive as you might think. There are a lot of gaps in our knowledge still, even though we are finding out more things like, researching in Amarna and finding the cemeteries there, and stuff like that. That's fairly new, but still, that was being reported on a few years ago, and, again, it's not something I didn't know picking up that book. And she fills some of these gaps in her chapters by talking about the predecessors of the kings in question. Half of each chapter is talking about a particular king's predecessors. Or, to put it another way, filler. Secondly, her language is emotionally charged throughout. Every other paragraph is making a parallel to something in the modern world and not really spending enough time to build that comparison, and they're all over the place. She jumps from Putin to Fox News to Kim Il-sung and then, to the Kardashians, and I'm like, It makes for a frenetic and an exhausting read. It would make more sense to me to take one pharaoh and discuss them and compare them to one modern figure and build that parallel through the course of the chapter, but that would require having something to say. Now understand, I am not trying to deny or justify the power structures that she is talking about in her book, ancient or modern, and I've suffered directly from some of the modern ones. But challenging these power structures is going to require a lot more than just cliched language, which this book is rife with. I grew up with this idea that would now be considered naive and antiquated, and that is that academia and scientific inquiry, and Egyptology is a science, are all about impartiality, neutral language, and the betterment of all humankind through the pursuit of knowledge. Somewhere along the way, that's gone off the rails, to use, another modern saying. We've lost sight of that goal. Yes, we're starting to understand now that, in looking back, that disciplines like Egyptology and Assyriology were built on colonialism. Yes, mention that and move on. Keep that high standard of trying to become impartial and try to look at information and interpret it in as neutral and unbiased a way as possible. The problem is a lot of postmodern scholarship has adopted the idea that, well, none of us can really be impartial. We're all going to have an inherent bias. And for a while it seemed that articles were just saying, okay, well, here's my bias, let me try to, account for it. But this book seems like it's just given up and decided to pander to a different group. My last criticism. Ancient history teaches us about the timeless parts of humanity. It shows us where we are better off now than we were then, and where we're still the same as we've always been. But if you really want to understand modern social discourse, what's going on with us right now, one of the first things we have to look at is the very medium that is allowing me to talk to you, the viewer, right now. The internet has changed us in ways that we are still trying to understand. I was a freshman in college when somebody published a doctorate that became an instant landmark piece of research on internet addiction. This was back in 1995, and we're still trying to understand that. And you can also go back to the mid-20th century and look at how you had really what I see as a perfect storm of radio and then television, the military-industrial complex, the rise of mass consumerism, all of these things, and World War II is kind of your benchmark here. For a long time, scholars were trying to understand, psychologists were trying to understand, how did a madman have an entire country under his sway, in Germany and then in Italy, and she mentions it a little bit, but there are social factors and technology factors and things that were going on then that the ancient pharaohs didn't have. If we want to understand where we are now, we have to look at the 20th century moving forward. And I would recommend, if you really want to understand where we are right now, culturally and politically, 2 recommendations. 1, The Psychology of the Internet by Patricia Wallace. Now, this is a first printing from 1999. There has since been a second edition of this book published, because this was another groundbreaking study. And it looked at how the internet is changing our behavior. And it's grounded in psychology. Now, in that field, there's another book that I recommend. The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion by Jonathan Haidt. Also, very good book. This was published in 2012. And I'm almost to the end of it. This book is freaking brilliant. And it's really going to have you thinking. But it says a lot. And it's also very neutral. And that's something that we need right now. We need that neutral language, that neutral inquiry that looks at both sides and tries to understand, how did we get here? Because if we're just pulling at the 2 extremes, and that's the problem that I have with this book. And a funny thing, why is it that Egyptologists are very quick to borrow concepts from modern philosophy and from sociology, but they don't even look at psychology unless we're talking about, Jungian archetypes and mythological texts. That just seems to me to be a neglected area of inquiry. But in short, if you are a well-read Egyptophile, this book is a waste of time. It's on bookshelves now. Don't be tempted. I feel like I got suckered with this book. So you know, there's only one thing to do. Hi, I'd like to return this book, please. Yeah. You were expecting maybe... or... There's a difference between a book that's just annoyingly bad and a book that's the print equivalent of Running with Scissors. The Good Kings is something that you can waste a couple of hours on, but some books will poke your eye out. But don't worry, I've already ordered some books for some more book reviews for next year, so that's something that you can look forward to. Also, thanks to all of you, my viewers, because we are now at a point where we can do super thanks. So look for the icon for that. And if you really enjoy a video, you can give us a super thanks and we will find a way to super thank you back. Another way that you can do that is you can go join us on Patreon. We've rolled out some new things with Patreon over this year, including some merchandise, a sticker, and of course our Bride of the Mummy t-shirt. You can get those at the respective tiers for that, and they've been well received. There will be more things to come out in 2023, and we'll get this shirt on Patreon as an exclusive for the top tier for that. And so all of those things you'll be able to follow if you join our Patreon peeps and follow along. Of course, you can also join us on Fridays for our live broadcast, and you can look forward to a new episode with some animation for next month. We've already started doing voiceover for that, and that'll be one of those little sneak peeks on Patreon, but you'll get to see the full production for December. So in the meantime, I hope everyone who is in the United States has a wonderful Thanksgiving, and for everyone, all of my viewers all over the world, thank you as always. Let's have a good holiday season. There's lots of different holidays, of course, Kemetic ones as well as, more mainstream ones. We'll talk about some of those next month. So for the Kemetic How-To Guide, this is Sharon, wishing you Synapti. Enjoyed this video? Then be sure to hit like and subscribe to the Kemetic Independent channel. You can also buy my books on Lulu.com, and special thanks to all my Patreon supporters. Join us for updates, outtakes, and exclusive videos only on Patreon. Check the description for links.